The last screen to show you in this user tutorial is the export screen. The export screen is useful for grabbing large amounts of data, grabbing lots of different sample information from various sources, even if it's unrelated, and putting it together in one big table so that it can be exported into an Excel file, maybe for analysis with other tools, or maybe you want to mail it to somebody or something like that. Because I have admin permissions, I see all of the users here. Your permissions may be limited. You may only see your own, but the export's a little more impressive when I show it this way. In order to export some data, you have to select the data that you want to export. So here I'm going to click on my username, and you see that the button up here is now enabled, so I could load this table if I wanted to. And that would load all of my projects, all of my samples, all into one big table. But I want to make it a little more interesting. So I'm going to go to John Parker's, and I'm going to also select his Rangers sample. So now I've selected two different things at two different levels. So I've selected a user, and I've selected a sample from a different user. But that's no problem here. Now I can click Load Table, and I go to the database and I get all the data that I just asked for, arranged in a tree. Now we see something here that we didn't see in any of the other results tables. Before we had tables that had replicates in them and sample level calculations in them, but now we're also seeing project levels and user levels. So this is basically the data I asked for. So for John Parker, I got his Rangers sample, which has the 3 replicates that I wanted in it, and for my user, I got all of my projects and all of my samples, all of the replicates that belong to them. The data in this case is reasonably similar. We have carbon dioxide. Some of the analyses are slightly different. Here we're doing a PBL, here we're doing a heated gas clumped analysis. Here we're doing bulk CO2 analysis, but we're still doing CO2, so a lot of the columns in the tables are similar. It can get a little bit crazy though if you were to include things like sulfur or nitrogen or something like that in this table, which Easotope doesn't currently support, but hopefully will in the future. So because you can basically include anything in this table, the columns get a little bit confusing. So you may have large areas where you have nothing, because that particular analysis didn't support it. And the order that the columns are put in initially is a random order that it's not completely random, but it's largely random order that the database put things in because it really couldn't figure out how to do it better. So if you're going to use this often, you're probably going to want to define your own table layout like we showed in the tables video, and use that. Of course, from here we can export just like we could in the other table layout and get any kind of information that we want out of it. So that's the exporting of the data that we've selected. If we want to export something other than what we have here, we have to change. See, our button is no longer enabled. We have to change the selection, and now we could reload just this thing if we wanted to. In fact, let's do that. So now we have just this sample and just the replicate that belongs to that sample. It only has one. One thing you have to be careful about is making sure that the status is okay here. So you want to basically scan through the list, make sure there's no errors. If there are errors, you have to see what level is the error on. Is it on the replicate level or is it on the sample level? If it's on the sample level, go to the sample analysis screen. If it's on the replicate level, go to the replicate analysis screen and figure out why that's an error condition, and then redo the export. The export data is not automatically updated as the database updates, so you're going to want to have to click this yourself to update, to refresh it if you know something's changed in the database. The lower table here is basically all of the replicates that exist in the correction intervals that all of these replicates belong to. So if we have a list of, let's go back to something more interesting. Let's get all of his, all of mine. Whoops, wrong selection. His and mine. Now we have a bigger export. We have many more replicates here. We've got, I don't know, about 12, 15 replicates, something like that. Each of these replicates belong to a correction interval, and that correction interval corrected the replicate using the standards in that interval. So if you go through all these replicates and figure out which correction interval they came from, and then you went and collected all the standard replicates that are in those correction intervals, that's what this table is here. So this table below is a replicate level table. Everything in here has an R in front of it because it's a replicate. This is a replicate level table of all of these standards that were used to correct each of these, all of these things up here. So for this data, you needed these standards to do all the correction. This may be useful for your own analysis, or it may be useful for publication where you need to include the replicates, the standard replicates that you used.